Commissioner Jeff Johnson is the Republican candidate for governor. Commissioner Johnson has a long history of public service. In the year 2000, he was elected to the Minnesota House of Representatives and served there for 6 years. While in the House, he was elected Assistant Majority Leader and served as Chairman of the Civil Law and Elections Committee and the House Republican Steering Committee. In 2008, he was elected to the Board of Commissioners in Hennepin County, where he represents the 7th District. We are very pleased and thankful that Commissioner Johnson has agreed to join us this morning and to share his vision for education in Minnesota. Please join me in welcoming Commissioner Jeff Johnson.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for being here. Thanks for giving me a couple minutes this morning. I kind of give you my background and tell you what I think about education, and then if there's time, I would love to try to answer some of your questions. I have long said that the toughest job in politics is being on a school board, something that I have never done, probably followed closely by church council. And because you are affecting every day that thing in our lives that is most precious to all of us, our kids. Our boys go to public schools in Wayzata. And so I know it's very personal, it's very emotional for all your constituents, everything you do. So I truly do appreciate all that you work on and all that you're trying to do. Let me give you a little bit about my background. I know some of you in the room, but I don't know many of you. So let me give you the short version. I was born and raised in Detroit Lakes, Minnesota. My wife, Sandy, is from Crookston, Minnesota. We went to Concordia College up in Moorhead, so we're children of northwestern Minnesota. I spent a few years away. I went to law school out east and spent a couple years in Chicago. And we have now been in Plymouth for almost 20 years. We've got 2 boys. Thor is at Wayzata High School. He's a junior. Rolf is at East Middle School in the Wayzata school system. I've spent most of my life in the private sector, both as an employee and as a self-employed business owner. And as Bruce mentioned, I served 6 years in the Minnesota House representing Plymouth and Points West. And now the last 6 years I've been on the Hennepin County Board representing essentially western and northwestern Hennepin County. And I should add that I spent 13 years in the Detroit Lakes High School public school system. My wife spent 13 years in the Crookston public school system. Her parents are actually lifelong public school teachers, and both of our boys, as I mentioned, will spend their entire school career in the Wayzata public school system. So public schools are not an abstraction to me. They're actually a huge part of my life, and despite what you might hear on commercials about me not caring about public schools, I have a pretty vested interest in the success of everything you do. So don't believe everything you hear on television. Let me share a couple thoughts that I have about K-12 education. First, and very importantly, I understand the fact that money matters. It's one of the reasons that while I was in the legislature, every single session I voted to increase K-12 spending. Again, don't believe everything that you see on television. I never voted to cut spending because I recognize how important it is in our state. It's actually constitutionally mandated in this state that we provide a good K-12 education to all of our students. So that is something we do in Minnesota. I suspect that's something we will always do in Minnesota. But here's a difference, I think, between the governor and me. I don't believe that it's just about money. I think there's more to it than just the money. Number one, I think on top of that money, there's a real importance in providing all of you with the flexibility to spend at least some of the money that you get from the state in ways that you think will best serve your communities, that will best serve the kids in your school system, rather than the state always telling you how to do it. And I think that's a philosophical difference we have. I think that we've seen, at least the last few years, very much a top-down philosophy about public education. I believe otherwise. I think the best example of that probably in the last couple of years is all-day kindergarten. I think all-day kindergarten is great. We sent our boys to all-day kindergarten. We paid for it because we could afford to, and I think that was just fine. But we have it now, and I think that is going to be a big plus for a lot of parents. However, I do have a little different philosophy on that. When we increase education spending, I'm always going to have a bias towards not attaching the strings to it and saying, let's let our school districts decide how best to serve their communities. My guess is that for a lot of you, you probably would have chosen to spend it on all-day kindergarten. And that's great, but maybe some of you would have said, you know what, there's something else that our community needs. There's something different that our kids need rather than all-day kindergarten. And I'm always going to have that bias. My first bill that I actually wrote as a freshman in the House of Representatives was a mandate elimination bill. I went through as the new guy in the House, and I think there were 147 mandates or whatever the number was at the time, and I picked out, I think it was the 7 or 8 that were the easiest for people to understand, and I thought the easiest to eliminate. And I learned a valuable lesson my first year in the legislature. Every mandate is there because someone got it there, and they will fight to the death to keep every one of those mandates. And in the end, we were actually able to get rid of a couple of them. It was a small victory, but as a freshman, that was okay. But that is my philosophy, that generally, you guys are going to make better decisions about what's good for your community and what's good for your kids than what the state will, or what the legislature will, or what the governor will. Number 2, on top of the money, I think it's really important that the state provides you with the power to hire and promote and retain and reward the very best teachers. Most of the studies that we read will say that the 2 best predictors of success for kids in school are, number 1, involved parents, and number 2, great teachers. And I don't happen to believe there's a lot government can do about forcing parents to be involved. Maybe we can remove some barriers, but that's largely going to be their decision. But there is so much we can do at the state level to help you hire and promote and retain and pay well the very best teachers. And we're not doing that right now. And again, here's a big difference between Governor Dayton and me, because I think he's not only not doing that, he's actually preventing you from doing that. And I believe that is happening because I believe that he's letting the teachers union, or at least the leaders of the teachers union, set education policy right now. And I'm not an anti-union guy. I grew up in a union household. I have represented unions as a lawyer over the years, but I will never ever let a special interest, whether it's unions or whether it's business interests or otherwise, dictate to me what policy should be, especially in K-12 education policy. And I think that's a difference between Mark Dayton and Jeff Johnson. And let me give you a couple examples. The last in, first out bill, the 10-year reform bill, that passed on a broad bipartisan basis. My DFL senator was the chief author of that bill, and as you all know, that would have allowed schools, when there's a layoff, to look at more than just tenure, to look at performance or other issues as well. The governor vetoed that bill. I don't think there was any substantive reason to veto that bill other than a special interest wanted him to. Another example is Teach for America. There may be mixed feelings about Teach for America in this room, but most people that I talk to that know education, whether they're liberal or conservative, think highly of that organization. It trains young people to go into inner city schools and serve, in many cases, underserved kids who are struggling, and the results are really impressive. That passed on a bipartisan basis. The governor vetoed, I think it was $1 million allocation. This governor is not one to turn down spending money, but he vetoed that small allocation. There was no substantive reason for that. It was because, again, a special interest told him to. I'm going to base my decisions in every case on what's best for our kids rather than what a special interest tells me to, and I'm going to do everything possible that I can to help you retain and reward the very best teachers, because that's the best thing for our kids. So what you do, I believe, is extremely important, and I genuinely thank you for that. And I really look forward as governor to working with all of you to make our schools as good as they've ever been, both in the metro and all around the state of Minnesota. So thank you all so much, and if it's okay, I'm happy to take some questions. Or comments, or advice.
Good morning, Commissioner. Michael Schwartz with Richfield Public Schools. I work in finance and operations for the school district. And you mentioned that you want to give funds to school districts to allow districts to spend how they see fit. There are many aids, payments that we get from the schools, many different pots of money. Some of them are tied to economic
Right.
conditions. What's your feeling or philosophy about that? Because what the state philosophy has been is to provide additional funding for those students of need.
Right. And I think there's absolutely a place for that. I mean, we're never going to be at a place where we're putting 100% of what we spend in education on the per pupil formula, because there are different needs. I fully recognize that. There are different needs that are in the inner city and maybe in the inner ring suburbs, and very different needs in parts of greater Minnesota. There might be more expensive transportation needs in some parts of the state, or declining enrollment. So we are always going to have certain pots of money that go towards whether it's poverty or whether it's English language or other things. But my bias is always going to be moving as much as we can, at least, towards that per pupil funding and trying to treat kids a little more the same. One of the biggest problems I have with our funding formula is that no one understands it. There may be a few people in this room who do, but there was almost no one in the legislature who truly understood it when I was there, and I'll admit, I was probably one of them. I think I understood it better than most, but I mean, unless you're full-time in this, there's no way you can understand the funding formula. And the reason that is because over the years, we've based a lot of the funding formula on politics, on passing an omnibus bill every 2 years, an omnibus funding bill, where they're saying, well, we need 4 more votes to get it passed, so let's figure out a new funding stream to go over here, and there are 4 votes, and then we leave it in there. And so there's a lot of politics in education funding, and it would be nice if we could take a little bit of that out. But I fully recognize that there are needs in certain parts of the state that are going to be very different. So the bias is giving you more flexibility, knowing that that's never going to be anywhere near complete. Any other questions or thoughts that you have? While you're walking over there, I'll just mention something that struck me that I meant to mention when I was talking. We've been doing something on the Hennepin County Board that has been really positive, I believe. We've had the county commissioners and top staff meeting with the superintendents in Hennepin County on I think a quarterly basis to get together to talk about how we can work better together, how we can better legally share information about students, because a lot of the students that we are serving in Hennepin County, the schools are serving in different ways, or maybe having different issues with or problems with. And if we can share some of that information and try to work a little better together, I think we're better serving kids that need help. It's been a really positive exercise. It's been at times an exacerbating exercise, because it seems so easy to be able to share this information and collaborate. It's actually hard to do because, as you know, there are a lot of laws out there. But I would love to see more both local and state government working with superintendents and with school board members to try to serve our kids better and not have so much overlap, and at times actually be butting heads. So I'm sorry.
Marilyn Forsberg, Spring Lake Park. Would you comment on your feelings about charter schools and vouchers and that
Sure.
whole piece?
What was the last part? Oh, that whole piece. I'm sorry. I'm a supporter of charter schools. I think that the more options we can provide for parents, the better. That also goes to school choice. I think that the more choice you give to parents, the better. Vouchers, I would be supportive of, although my preference, if we're going to go down that route, would be to talk about tax credits, because it doesn't allow the government through the courts to get involved in the private schools. Having said that, that is probably not the direction we're going to be going anytime in the near future in Minnesota. When I talk about more school choice, I generally talk about the areas where the schools are struggling the most, where the students are struggling the most. I think that's the starting point for us. If we want to introduce more school choice, I think we start with the schools that have chronically had poor results. And I think the more choice you can provide to those parents, because I'm sure you hear it too, those of you in areas where it has been tough, the parents are frustrated. They're terribly frustrated. They would like more involvement, and they would like more options. And I think it would be good for us to provide them more options. I know everyone's not going to love hearing me say that, but that's my honest feeling on it.
Julie Schweitzer from St. Louis Park and WEMIP, the West Metro Education Programs. The research tells us that the majority of influences on a student's academic success come from outside the school. And yet every time when we talk about academic achievement, and it's understandable in this setting, we talk just about the school, 6 hours a day that a kid's in school. What are your thoughts on addressing issues of the poverty, food, health, lead pipes, all those kinds of things that we know affect a student's success?
Yeah, absolutely. And as I mentioned, most of what I've read said that the very most important thing for kids is involve parents. And there's not a lot you all can do about that, nor is there a lot government can do about that. But there are things that we can do to address poverty and homelessness and some of the other things that really make learning difficult for a lot of kids in this state. I have been a strong proponent of starting to actually measure the human service programs that we have in this state. It's something that I've been pushing for on the county board, and I've had some level of success in that. Let's actually start measuring. We have thousands and thousands of human service programs that are intended to help people, help adults and kids who are in poverty or homeless or who are being reintegrated from prison into society. The problem is we measure very few of those programs to figure out which ones are actually changing people's lives, because some of them are. I see it on the county board. We have programs that are making life better for people who are struggling. We have other programs that aren't, and we continue to fund them. And we should be measuring those programs, and the ones we're funding because it makes us feel good, but they're really not changing people's lives. We need to redirect that money, some of it to the programs that are actually working. I think we'll have a lot better results that way. That's a long-term project. It's not something that we're going to be able to do in a couple months. That's going to take years to actually start measuring those programs. I think that makes a big difference. Another piece is what I just mentioned. I think we could do a much better job amongst government entities in collaborating to serve these kids that need help, who are, moving every couple months and switching schools, or whose parents are in poverty and can't afford the basics, or who come to school hungry every morning. And I think if we do a better job of collaborating, we can better serve these kids and hopefully make learning a little bit easier for them. It's a long walk.
Good morning, Commissioner. Thank you for being here this morning. I'm Lori Swanson. I'm with the White Bear Lake Area School Board. Given your earlier comment and about special interest groups, and our group really is a special interest group here representing public schools for fair public school policy and funding. If you're elected in November, could you give us a sense of how we could work with you to, as a path for a better Minnesota with public education, rather than being viewed as a roadblock, but how we can partner with you on public education?
Thanks, Ed. That is a great question. I am an open door sort of guy, and I know everybody in politics says that, but if you talk to people who have worked with me, they will say it's true. I am one who believes strongly in getting as much input as possible before making a decision, and that means sitting down with folks that I maybe don't always agree with. I'm not talking about you, but there might be other groups out there that maybe tend to be more DFL. I'm going to want as much input and want to be able to work with them as best I can. So I would love to come to your meetings as often as a governor can, and not just talk to you, but actually hear from you, and maybe that happens in a smaller group in a realistic way. But input for me is really important, and I think if you look at my record during my 6 years in the House, you'll see that that's how I operated. Every year I took one of the more difficult bills we had as a House Republican caucus, and not only got it through the House, which was not easy, but easier than getting it through the DFL Senate, but then also went over to the Senate and worked with whoever the DFL author was to figure out what we need to change about the bill to actually get it passed over there. So it's not about, let's just have the big fight and I can say I tried and lost, but let's actually get it done. That means you need to sit down with people and figure out what's actually realistic, what's actually doable. For me, if I'm governor, we're going to have a DFL Senate because they're not up for election. We may have a Republican House, we may have a DFL House, but we'll have divided government. And so if I actually want to do more than just fight about things and not really change anything, if I actually want to make a difference, which is the reason I'm in politics, I'm going to have to figure out how to get whatever I like passed through at least a DFL Senate. And I think getting as much input from leaders in the community, I'm sure there's a broad mix of politics in this room, and you have a lot of influence, I think, on both parties, or at least you should. If you don't, I think your help in that will actually help me to accomplish some of the things that I would like to get done. So very much open door and collaboration, and I'm a pretty good listener. We might not always agree, but I'm a pretty good listener.
We have time for one more.
George Kimball, White Bear Lake. Lori Swanson asked a much better question than I'm going to ask here. And maybe there should be another one after mine. But I want to go to your TV ad, and just kind of for fun, partly. But you, in the ad, it sort of makes reference to Governor Dayton being out of touch for awarding bonuses to failed Obamacare bureaucrats. So there's a thought that, that wouldn't be his role. He certainly did, I think arguably didn't pay the bonuses. The Mincher board did or whatever. But
Right.
So would you say that would be the governor's role to get to that level of overseeing the administration? And then second,
Yep.
do you really get down there and measure the length of the grass when your kids?
I actually don't. Here's what I've learned about being a dad of a teenage boy. You have to make a tough choice because he doesn't mow the grass the right way. But I've finally given up and said I can live with that rather than me doing it myself. But no, I don't actually snip. I think the buck stops here is going to be my philosophy as governor. And one could argue that, well, the governor shouldn't know about whether they were paying bonuses to completely incompetent people in Mincher. I mean, I don't know how you can argue otherwise, but that was the governor's hand-picked board. He picked every one of those members, and they made that decision. So you could say, well, he didn't. It's not his responsibility, but it is, and it should be. And I think Minnesotans deserve a more engaged governor than what we have right now. And I could give you a lot of examples where that hasn't happened, but I don't want to go down that partisan road right now. But I do think that there is responsibility, and I don't think we're seeing a lot of it being taken in the current administration. You'll see more of that from me. Great, thank you so much. I'd love your support. Thank you for everything you do.